and they have made themselves available to share kind of their stories along the journey, how they got started with a replacement of ERP, picking Workday, and just where they are and the value and the expectations that they're getting out of the product. So what I wanted to do quickly is just do a brief introduction of everybody that's on the call that you'll be hearing from, where they are on their journey. And then I'm going to turn it over to Maggie McIntosh. She is a director of enterprise applications with AVAP. She also used to sit in the seat of a client. She was a program project manager at the deployment for City and County of Denver. And then she's going to be moderating throughout the rest of this presentation. So with that, what I wanted to first introduce, we have Leslie Buckman on the call. She's a director of shared services for the state of Maryland. And several years ago, probably over 10 years ago, they made the big decision to move to Workday. I believe they're one of the first states. So she is here to join us, and she will be talking about where they are. So thank you, Leslie. Sure. We also have Monica Klimek. Monica is with Sourcewell, and they have been live on Workday for over a year at least. Monica was the program director for that project with Sourcewell, intimately involved with all aspects of the project. And so really glad for Monica to join. Thank you, Monica. Also with us, we have Mike Cerna with the City of Olathe, Kansas, right there in the heartland. And he's the CIO for the city. And City of Olathe is just really the beginning of their journey with Workday. They're about, I would say, just into 5 months. So, a different perspective, but Mike's got a lot he wants to communicate, and happy to have him join. So thank you, Mike. And then with us, we have also Noel Walkinshaw. He is the Chief Innovation Officer for Salt Lake City. And similar to the city of Olathe, they are still fairly early in their journey. They're about 6 or 7 months into a deployment of Workday HR and Finance. And so again, thank you, Noel, for joining. And I think collectively, the folks, we've had a great turnout. Really happy to see that. Very interested in what you guys have to say. And I think that's an indicator of the demand in the market. Maybe the impacts of the pandemic really drove digital transformation a little more than people had planned. But regardless, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie. And then I will say, if anybody has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks, Maggie.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. As Rich mentioned, my name is Maggie McIntosh. I am our practice director for Enterprise Solution Architecture here at AVAP. I started my Workday career at City and County of Denver on the client side as their program manager for full platform. At the time, they were, and they may still be, maybe not, they were the largest full platform public sector implementation. We went live about seven years ago. So Leslie in the state of Maryland predates me a little bit, but we were we were very early adopters of Workday government, or the government lean to Workday. So you'll hear Leslie talk a little bit more about that. But the idea behind this webinar and some of our additional webinars this year is to share tips, tricks, experience, exposure, things that we would not recommend anybody else do based on our own experience, as well as the things that worked really well, to not only kind of help you orient around the Workday implementation itself, but things that you can do now, or can at least start thinking about now, that are going to help you regardless of when you decide to start your actual Workday project. We've noticed in the past 5-6 years that there's a significantly higher percentage of easier successful implementations when you start before the start of the actual project. So that's really what today is focused around. We hope you have some practical tips to leave with, as well as some further conversations or ideas for your organization, where regardless of kind of where you sit in that Workday journey. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, kind of give a little bit of information about what they do, the organization that they work for, and kind of where they are in their Workday evolution. Leslie, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm sorry. Leslie Bookman. As they said, I'm from the state of Maryland. We did go live with Core HR in 2014. So we were right around that same time for Denver, but we're not full platform. We're really HCM, time, absence management, gross payroll only, and then benefits. So our project was a little different. Also, we did a phased in implementation. We did that for a couple of reasons. The size that we were dealing with. We have about 50,000 employees in our core HR, about a little over 40,000 for time and absence and gross payroll, and then 160,000 for employees and retirees on benefits. So we have some subsets that don't do everything that we have. So for that reason, we did a phased in approach for those various go lives. So right now in our journey, where we are is we've completed all of our implementation. Benefits was the last, and that was in 2018, 2019. So we really have focused on trying to what comes next, what kind of enhancements we're interested in. There's not a lot of time for that when you're implementing. The original project. So that's where we are right now.
Great. Monica?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So Monica Klimek, as Rich had said. And so maybe I'll give you a quick little, what is Sourcewell? Because we're not a state organization, we are government. We are located in Minnesota, so it's cold here. And we really have 4 divisions. So we have cooperative purchasing, we're all fully self-sustaining, cooperative purchasing, a health insurance pool, regional services, and a technology division. And so we're really a government organization that is here to help other government organizations really become operational efficient and successful. And so we offer solutions in all of those different spaces in order to do that. We're located in Staples, Minnesota, and then our technology division is located in St. Paul. We started our Workday journey. I think my director of finance has been talking about it since the day I started, right? Most finance Workdays are finance driven. But in 2019, early 2019 is really when we started the investigation and selection process of what ERP system, and then finished that process around that August timeframe. And then we dove, both feet in and did full big bang, ripped the Band-Aid off, did core HR, benefits, time and absence, payroll, and financials, and implemented December 2020. So we fit a lot in a year. I think a couple unique things I'll just share about us is we did all of this we have less than 250 employees, which is really, really small in the grand scheme of things if I think of Leslie's, right? So we have less employees, I think, to implement this big system. And so there were some key things that we had to do, we'll talk about later, that were successful. But it allowed us some of that flexibility in what we needed to do and what we decided to implement. And then over this last year, we've really been continuous improving and then implementing some of the rolling adoption type SKUs that we've also licensed, like talent and performance and different things like that.
Great, thanks, Monica. Mike?
Sure. Mike Sarno with the city of Olathe in Kansas. We have we're about 150,000 people in the city and about 1,000 full-time employees, another maybe 500 or so part-time and seasonal, depending on the time of the year. And we've, Rich said, we're 5 months into our planning really and implementation. And so we're doing HCM and then finance in 2 phases, both expected to complete. So HCM in about June, July timeframe, and then by this time next year, fully implemented on the two paths. So, we've done, we started off with just looking on the HR side of the field and decided midway through that selection process that we really wanted to look at something that replaced our entire ERP system with an integrated system. So that's a little bit of the history of how we selected Workday.
Great. And then last but not least, Noel.
Hi, Noel Walkinshaw. I work in Salt Lake City for the city, Chief Innovation Officer. Prior to this role, I was the Deputy Director, Administrative Services, Director for Public Services, and I spent a lot of time doing community development work as well. We had our Change Champions meeting just before this this meeting, and in that we are about 2 years into our project, in the sense of when our team formed and what we started working on. And one of the first things that when we did as a team is the first core group all went through a change management training, and we've tried to really structure our project around the mindset of organizational change, not just a technology project. And we've done a lot of work in preparation for that. We will largely have done more work in preparation than we will actually in implementation. And I think that's really key to helping us do this effectively. Lots that we've done, in addition to we're doing the human resources, finance, the city, we have an airport. We also have public utilities that's included with that. So there are 3 big agencies, the general city agency, public utilities, and airport. So there's a lot of complexity to what we're doing. And in addition to this, we're restructuring our chart of accounts to modernize it. When we started this, our previous piece of software was implemented in 1993. And they did not do any chart of accounts work in 1993. So we do not know the origin of our chart of accounts. And so it really is a modernization for us, right? And that was really what was driving it. We were not able to get out the information or capture the information we really want to be a modern and progressive city under our current architecture. And that's really one of the big objectives for what it wants to do. And that process has been pretty fascinating. So we are testing human resources right now. It's going well, and we're in the preparations of phase 2, which is our finance, and that's doing, our stars are aligning for that. So we're expecting to have success in that area as well. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Noel. So kind of putting together this panel of people, we wanted to make sure to share experiences from various sized organizations, as well as variable setups that you see commonly in public sector. Some of them have unions, some don't. Police, fire, and sheriff is represented in different groupings between all of the people and organizations on this panel. And then also, like Noel said, from Salt Lake City, the airport is included. It was also included for City and County of Denver. So hopefully everybody on this call can relate, or their organization can relate to one, if not more, of our people. And again, please feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go along, or we'll have a Q&A session at the end, but don't be shy. We're certainly not. But moving into some of the meat of what we wanted to talk about. A lot of you touched a little bit on why you chose, why you decided to embark on a Workday project. Older systems that don't talk to each other, information where you don't know the origin. I think that resonates around public sector quite a bit. But if you could delve a little bit more into that, and then, why did you decide to embark on an ERP project? And then specifically, why in the grand scheme of things did you choose Workday? Monica, would you mind starting?
Sure, absolutely. And this is a really interesting question, right? Because I did share that we're small. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we're very small, and Workday, as all of you know, comes with a little higher price tag, right? Because it is a best-in-class solution. And I think with that was one thing we were looking for. We have a very, very supportive, board of directors, and we know where we're at today, but really where we want to go in the future. And so coming from some of those antiquated systems that don't talk, everything was on, Excel spreadsheets, all of those things, just kind of like what Noel talked about. We needed a system that was going to support us today, that would also get us where we needed to be. And so as we went through that journey of vendor selection, you know, there was several out there that you could choose from that probably met the needs. One of the big things we really liked with Workday is how it was all integrated. I think Mike kind of mentioned that too. So you're not having a separate HCM system and a separate financial system, and then having to manage all of that work, right? All that gray space between them. So that was really important, as well as designing for our end users in mind, really wanting to make sure our team could get in and figure it out, you know, pretty easily and pretty quickly. And we felt that Workday was pretty intuitive that way. As far from a cost perspective, one of the things that, you know, we leveraged in our implementation is cooperative purchasing, right? We do that as an organization as well. And so we kind of drank our own Kool-Aid. I mentioned that to the panelists, and really looked to see how can we leverage what we do as an organization as well in looking to other cooperative purchasing type organizations, and can we license our Workday implementation, you know, through those opportunities, and that worked really, really well for us and allowed us to, you know, kind of get us to where we're at today.
Great, thank you. Noel, I know Salt Lake City went through a very robust selection process. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. When we started our project, we really set some objectives for ourselves, right? We did this as a part of the RFP, but even before, and the interconnected system was a real high priority for us. We have had some experience prior to this in public services. I went through an implementation where we combined all of the operations and maintenance for our assets into one system. We had 5 or 6 different systems, unique databases. No one could tell you how much it cost to fix a pothole or where we were going to fix potholes. So we went through a process to integrate all of that work, and we saw a lot of success in that work. And prior to that, I was in charge of implementing a permitting service where we implemented all of the various reviews. So that is an area where we'd seen success and we wanted that value. We already have a system that's 27 different pieces of software with 27 unique databases, and we somehow try to get them to talk to each other. And that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted something that was truly integrated, a common structure, right? Consistency in the data and how we organize it, because we know that the output would be better. And so that really was one of the driving high value targets for our selection process. And we reviewed a number of systems, you know, and what floated to the top was Workday because of that, largely. You know, I've said it also that Workday has this delivery assurance, and we're having a good experience with that delivery assurance. We have a great relationship with AVAP, but it's nice to have that third party looking in and helping us to know. It gives me that comfort to know that, yeah, we're on track, or there's someone from the outside that can help you say, hey, this is orange, or this is, you know, you're in trouble here, or how can you have that help? And I really liked that. And that wasn't something we saw in other places. We know that our relationship with AVAP, with the implementation partners, is shorter term than our relationship is going to be with Workday. And so I liked having that relationship coming together very early.
And speaking of relationships, I know one of the big reasons that City and County of Denver chose Workday was the ecosystem, you know, the Workday community, or I guess the more formal Workday community, and then the more informal interaction, especially in public sector, of clients either, you know, going through their implementation process right now, answering questions to people that are trying to make the decision, and then, you know, continuing to interact, engage, and support each other in a, you know, their production environment. Leslie, you probably have the longest exposure to kind of the ecosystem and how it's grown, and the community in general. Would you mind sharing some of your experience there?
Sure. Like you said, we have been live since 2014, at least for the core HR. I think one of the reasons that we were so, when we went with Workday was the idea that it's business owner run. I'm an HR, I had been an HR professional before the project. That's why I got into the project when I did. So I wasn't an IT person with an IT background, sorry. So if anybody's IT. So business, the business process ownership is a big deal for us. So I think that Workday, because you're able to work in the system and change things and configure the system and have all that ecosystem for assistance with that. And you're talking you may be talking to IT professionals, you may be talking to HR professionals, whomever in that area, but you have that flexibility. You don't all have to be an IT staff member to be able to work in the system. And so, or to change it, to configure it. So I think that really appealed to us because our older system, I hate to beat everybody, but our older system was from the 1970s. It was mainframe. We skipped an entire generation of applications. So, so getting rid of that and moving to something like Workday with online services, all 9 yards, was very different, obviously. So you can see where that would be appealing for the business owner.
Nice. And I can tell you from the former tech side of the house, Workday's great too. it's a very interesting system from a technology perspective as well. So I can represent the tech crowd. We all end up getting along eventually. And actually, speaking of different departments getting along because of a Workday project, one of the key indicators of whether a project is going to be successful, whether it will hold to the original timeline, schedule, scope, budget, all of our favorite things to talk about during implementations, is the importance of thinking about what your governance process is going to look like early, either during the RFP or during, the sales presentations, but definitely before you start the project. Having that structure in place is going to go a long way. And Sourcewell and Monica kind of had that forethought, and they actually had a very rigid's the wrong word. It sounds negative. They had a very defined governance structure, kind of pre-project, during the project, and then now in their production environment. We thought we could share a little bit more about what they did, why it mattered, and how it helped them.
Sure. Thanks, Maggie. So what I think, especially from my lens, right, of kind of directing traffic, on the project, we had to go remote, 100% remote week 2. I think we completed week 2 in our architecture, and then everything kind of hit the fan, right? And then we had to go remote. And so looking back, one of the things that really helped us, I think, continue to be successful and actually hit our target date is, we established, the standard steering committee, PMO, all of those things. But we really took to heart guiding principles of our project, how we're going to work together and how we're going to make decisions. And that went from, functional leads all the way up to our CEO, I would say. And, so we spent a half a day and really just hashed through that, came up with a vision, came up with, 6 to 8 in each of those areas. And we really kind of didn't just, write them down and put them in the back burner and not think of them again. We actually laminated them on a little card and everyone on the project team internally had them. And because we felt that was really, really important for them to reference, especially because we weren't in a big war room, right, that a lot of these projects create. And then we also sent them to our implementation partners. And anybody knew that that started on the project, had to, take an oath and not really, but abide by all of these things. And I'll just share one of them was like following Workday best practices whenever possible, really strive hard. And by having our implementation partners really understand what we were driving to and what was important to us, it allowed them to course correct along the way or really hold us accountable when we were kind of going off the guardrails or saying, hey, can we do this? And can we do this? And we want to be special. they'd say, okay, well, let's talk about it. And they'd give us all the options, but then they'd say, do you really want to go to your steering committee and go to bat for that? You can, we're not going to say you can't do it, but we'd all remind ourselves of these principles. And we've actually kind of implemented that in some of our other projects as well. And the funny thing is a lot of these have stayed true to, I'd say, almost every single rolling adoption project that we've done. The vision of the what we're implementing has changed, but the how hasn't really changed. So I think that's just a testament that the team put the work in and really lived it.
You know, Salt Lake City went through a similar kind of thought exercise. I don't know if you guys went as far as to print out your guiding principles on note cards. We did that at City and County of Denver as well. So a lot of times on the first meetings, I'll bring mine with me. I still have it. They're hard to throw away. But Noel, did you guys end up printing them out, or can you share?
We have postcards. We haven't handed them out yet because we got them all printed, I think, just before Christmas, and then everybody was sent home again. So Liz on my team, her office is full of swag related to it. But yeah, I think that, I think that we're building on the same sort of concept that Monica is setting the vision for the project, right? We've really set our governance around our intent, right? It's more than just a technology implementation. We know that, my experience with technology in the city and watching it grow is, it was sit down, tell us what you do, and we build it for you. And now we're moving into an environment where we're moving into software as a service. And so we have to change, right? It used to be the system would be built around whatever oral tradition that work group would conduct, and that was the tool. And now we're moving to this software as a service. So we need to redesign how we work, right? And so we've built into the governance how we can address and communicate that change. We've built into it policy committees. We know that some policies may need to change, and we're finding some that we need to change. We talked about union negotiations can dramatically impact how you configure a system. And so we're in the process of trying to, really daylight when folks are going into the next round of union negotiations, like, hey, we have a framework that we have to work in. You can't just make up something and then we can go and make it happen, because it may not be able to do it. And so we're trying to establish a lot of governance around those objectives and how we bring in what are those best practices. And we've done a lot of communication around, please be ready to change, right? Please be ready to realign how you do things. And so far it's going well, right? I think our chart of accounts work has been a great example of that. It's when we started the project, there was, why is someone like Noel, who's not an accountant, leading this project? Because I'm not an accountant. I have a fear of Excel. But I'm good at facilitating things. And so it was really good for us to go through some of these early processes for those folks that are like those legacy stakeholders, to be able to get involved early, to really have those conversations. And that really is your governance structure and some of that early work you do to get that buy-in from those key stakeholders, especially those that are key stakeholders that have been, doing that task, that job for a long period of time.
Yeah, so one of the interesting ways that Salt Lake City structured what Noel was just describing that I really haven't seen before, but hopefully I see it, kind of become more standard in public sector, is in addition to kind of the normal project executive steering committee, the kind of governance structure, monthly steering committee meetings, et cetera. He also formed a policy committee that had some members of the executive steering committee, but also added additional decision makers from around the city that would be needed to change, or their input and vote of confidence would be needed to change city policy. So when things came up during design sessions or during conversations that would result in a policy change, they sat down and you did a little research, sat down and learned whether it was a regulatory policy, if it was mandated by law. And then we designed Workday to match their regulatory policy. But if it was just a city policy, then it went up to that policy committee to decide whether it still made sense, in a newer environment, or whether that committee was going to advocate for changing city policy. And we were able to design, Workday business processes around best practice with this full support and, the political weight of that policy committee. I can tell you, we did not do that with City and County of Denver. We learned a lot of lessons on the importance of forming governance early. We waited to, it didn't even occur to us, we waited to put together our post-production support model and production governance model until about 2 months before we went live with HR payroll. And it was not a fun, it was not a fun 2 months. So, maybe don't do what we did, but mirror, Sourcewell is a great example. Salt Lake City is a great example. I know City of Olathe is as well, but it's evolved in the past 5 or 6 years. So governance, establishing governance early is one of the key indicators of success. And the second one that we found is going to be change management. Starting to conceptualize change management again prior to the project, implementing it during or executing on it during the implementation itself, and then continuing a sustainable change program or adoption program once you move into your production environment. And I know Mike Cerna is a big apostle for change management, so I'm gonna call on him to talk a little bit about what they did for City of Olathe.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Every time.
Yeah, we definitely are taking the change management piece very seriously. I've known enough in prior implementations that's the piece that often gets cut because of time or money or resources, right? And so that and testing and training and change management is an area, in my opinion, that it's a dollar spent in change management up front is worth $100 in implementation and then in the adoption. So for us, we had done a governance methodology, and a lot of that was just to say, hey, this project is going to consume a lot of resources, and it's going to touch every single person in the city. So one, we have to all understand that as we go into this, and we're allocating resources to it. And then two, it's a big change because every process you do is going to be different, and so we're trying to get out ahead of the curve. We've got a couple of people who are designated like change management agents. We're working with a change management team to help develop what our process is so that we get adoption and people understand why they're making the change and what is the change that's coming. So it's not a surprise on day one, even if it's something as simple as timing into the system, it's different. You have to know what's coming and why it's coming, and then you're going to have a better adoption, smoother go live. So that's kind of where we're coming at it from a change perspective.
Thank you. Monica, I know your organization was, I guess, not unique in that you had, quite a few resistant departments or nervous departments moving from, your legacy system over to Workday, and change management was a big topic and still continues to be a big topic with your roadmap adoption plan. How did Sourcewell kind of plan for change management, and how has it evolved as your Workday journey has progressed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo Mike, right? I mean, we drink the change management Kool-Aid, right? Because it's important, right? We've all been in projects that hasn't happened and we have battle scars. So I'll just maybe share 3 things that I think maybe were different or that we did to help with change management. One is, besides really getting some cross-functional people, really understanding ProSci, and actually Sourcewell invested in some ProSci certification. We didn't just stop there, but we took our managers, our key people leaders and senior leadership team through some change management training. And that was really important because they needed to know, one, where they were at on their own change journey so that they could help their team. And we needed them to understand the role they played, right? If they were being negative Nancy or whatever, they really weren't going to help, that change throughout the organization. And then second is we formed kind of a change ambassador group. So that was a cross-functional group outside of the project team. So they were a fresh set of eyes, and we used them for a couple things. One, we bounced communication. Our OCM team bounced communication off of them. So we sent it to them first, or they sent it to them first and said, how does this make you feel? Do you understand it? Do you not? Are we communicating too much? Are we communicating too little? And they were very open, good and bad, like, yep, hit the mark, or whoa, you really need, words matter. You need to change this. And we also use that team as not really a user acceptance team, but as a proof our training materials, right? We subscribed to the adoption kit. We tried really, really hard not to make anything special because we didn't want to have a training team, right, to keep that all up to date. But there were some things that were unique to us. And so when the team put together their training materials and their training sessions, we ran it by them first and said, take it through it. Tell us what's wrong. Tell us what's not hitting the mark. Do you understand it? Are we speaking too fast? Are we, we've been in the system for a year. So it's like, second nature to the project team. And that was absolutely critical. And we use different change ambassador groups now on almost every project that we have going, because we just found that they were the pulse out there and the water cooler to tell us where we're not hitting the mark. So it's continuing to evolve, and I don't see it going anywhere.
The vocal opinions are are always a good time. And I'm going to tease a couple populations. We see this in almost every project. My recommendation is to specifically engage with public works and public safety early and often. They can become really great apostles and believers in Workday, or if they feel left out, they can be very challenging. And you can't go live with an ERP system without public safety. And there are very specific requirements that Public Works feels very strongly about, that if they're at the table from the beginning, they'll work with you, and Workday meets those requirements if we know about them. It's more challenging later on in the project, and can be a little bit of we call them bear traps. So public safety and Public Works, I love them to death, but make sure they're included and feel heard. So the last kind of official question we have, and we'll leave time for Q&A at the end, is going to be, how has your business changed? If you're currently live with Workday from what it used to be, or if you're not live, what are you expecting from Workday? What do you hope will change? What do you hope will be better? Again, Leslie probably has some of the longest government production tenure. So why don't we start with her and the state of Maryland?
Sure. So obviously the most obvious thing was going from paper to online and self-service and those kinds of things. So that was a tremendous improvement over what we had previously. The second thing I don't think we talk about as much, although we've led into it a little bit, is the standardization and the streamlining of processes, and even data, standardizing data, like the chart of accounts. We had a similar situation. Using the actual names of things instead of any coding, so that anybody looking at the system can really just do it and know what it means, and you don't have some special code that only certain people know. So we spent a lot of time on that to make sure we got that value, right? To make sure we were not continuing practices that were no longer working for us. We had one agency who wanted to continue, 13 approvals for one hire in their agency. Obviously, we didn't do that. We took those opportunities to really streamline the process wherever we could, and only really do the things that we needed to do through regulation or policy, and really cut the other stuff that really wasn't necessary out of the processes before we got into the system. So that was the second thing. And then training of support staff, that became so much more important because garbage in is garbage out. So we really wanted to start off the first go live with the core HR data was so important because everything would build upon that. If you had the wrong hire date, the person would never get their benefit event on time, or they wouldn't get the right coverage date. Or if they had the wrong FTE data in the system, you wouldn't get a benefit event at all, or you wouldn't get the right leave or time off accrual. So training staff to understand that all of it was connected and would be connected was a really big change for us. And obviously a great value because we weren't having those standalone systems and different data across those platforms. So those are the things that we found the most value from.
Great. So at kind of towards the beginning of projects or even before projects start, one of the things that we talk a lot about and Workday talks a lot about, they call them guiding principles. Noel shared some, Monica shared her card. They're the North Star of your project. Within those guiding principles, I think it's always helpful and nice to define, what are your metrics for success? That way you have something that you can measure in your current state, measure in Workday once you move to production, to really define and communicate what Workday has changed, what it's done to improve various entities of the organization. And designing some of those guiding principles or North Stars it's an opportunity to tie a technology project back to your end users and your constituents in a way that they're going to feel connected to. I know one of Monica's at Sourcewell is near and dear to my heart. We had it at City and County of Denver as well. And one of our guiding principles is sustainability. I live in Denver, Colorado. We've got this beautiful environment around us, and we wanted to make sure that as the seat of city government, that we were, respecting, promoting, and advocating for, what we were sworn to try and protect. Monica has a very similar story with Sourcewell and a similar guiding principle, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We didn't have as much regarding, I would say, like the green, sustainability that way. I would say when we think about it, it was maybe, do the covers a little bit of, it was like 90 pieces of paper, if that's where you were going, Maggie.
It was.
When we onboarded somebody. I think HR said it was roughly like 90 pieces. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, maybe I just put that in my distant memory when I started. But I think Leslie had some of those stories too. And we joked at the beginning of the project, like, how do we, X off every piece of paper, but I don't think we had a big enough conference room. And so I think about COVID and just all of these things. And really it was, how do we become more operationally efficient, right? And getting rid of paper, having a spot where everybody can see, where is this person at with onboarding? Where are they at with their benefit enrollment? Let the system tell the next person what to do next, versus walking down there and giving, the payroll person this or the invoicing, to this person. So that was really thinking about those end-to-end business processes. I saw a question in the chat too of, did you do all that design as you went, or did you do it all up front? And a little of both, I think, is what happens in these projects. There was some that we knew we needed to fix right away. We had to fix right away. Because you weren't going to do it manually. So you had to figure out like who was going to do what. But then there was a lot where we had to know the Workday best practice first before we could say, can we as an organization fit within it? Or how do we fit within it and not be special? So I think, and the rest of you can maybe echo that, or maybe you were able to do it differently, but we found we had to do both kind of throughout the project.
Yeah, and taking some time kind of pre-project to identify your business processes, or at least identify the ones that make you unique. I pick on unions all the time, as well as public safety. Sorry, the joys of working from home. Boodle background. I know I pick on unions and public safety quite a bit. They are near and dear to my heart, but union contracts almost always result in some slight deviation from Workday best practice. Procurement rules are another common example. If a PO or a request is under $5,000, maybe the approval routing just goes to that person's manager or the director of that department. But anything over $5,000 has to go to the assistant controller, for example. So finding those nuances or the things that make you unique are always very helpful to come into Workday projects with and into design sessions with. But, Workday operates a little bit differently, so that, 100, 200, 300 hours of business process mapping for every process across all of your departments, the entire organization before day one, or as an input into Workday design sessions isn't necessary anymore. Workday implements a little bit differently, and honestly, it's structured a little bit differently. So yes and no on business process mapping, prior to the project. Finding those unique characteristics will help, as well as, where things branch, like the procurement example will serve you well. So that is actually the end of our questions. I wanted to leave, looks like we have about 11 minutes left. Wanted to kind of open the floor to any of our participants to ask any of us questions that are on your mind. I have a couple written down. The first one I have is actually from Dennis, and it was around phased implementations, whether it's better to go with HR first, financials first, kind of pros and cons. This is a very consulting answer, and I tried not to use it, but the answer is it depends. So Mike's rolling his eyes at me. He heard this a lot. I need to get one of those big red buzzer buttons that everybody can kind of hit me with when that comes out of my mouth. It depends on where your pain points are in your organization. Workday can go live, finance first, HR first, all together. And you see a lot of each type. The caveat is, if Workday expenses is important to you, it's easier for HR to go first. If you want to track time entered to capital projects or to grants, or if you have any kind of effort certification around your payroll, it's easier to go HCM and payroll first, followed by financials. And the keyword is easier. Either way is not impossible, even with those characteristics or with those caveats. It's just a little bit easier if expenses are important to you, or if you tie time to grants or projects. And then I think we answered the BP redesign. And I think all the panelists actually went live with phased implementations, are going live with HR first, and then financials. In the past year, I can tell you that it's become a lot more common in public sector to see requests for financials first, and then HCM, especially from a budget planning perspective. That's usually really manual, really, really painful. And going live with financials and specifically financial planning will alleviate that in faster than if you went live with HR first. Yep. So one of the questions in the chat related to that is, when you replaced your finance module, did you include replacement of your purchasing module? Mike, do you want to tackle this one?
Sure, I can. We haven't obviously gone live with that, but we'll absolutely tackle that. It's part of our current ERP system, and it is one of the more important processes on the finance side for us, and it definitely will be part of our finance solution.
Okay. And I think everybody actually on here went. So typically finance and procurement is paired together. They operate in a really kind of seamless way with each other in Workday, and kind of naturally flow on a phase one implementation. You don't have to, but I think the impact on the positive impact on your organization, and honestly how much easier it makes your life in procurement, and flowing through all the way to your accounting, is worth the initial expense. So another one of the questions was, what strategies were used to accommodate or plan around the time needed from your resources, from the subject, client side subject matter experts, and how did you balance that with their day-to-day, tasks and activities? Noel, I know we spent a lot of time talking about this with Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I wrote an essay called "Balancing the Project," and we went through this to identify what the resources were, who we needed, right, and went through so that we could guesstimate the time commitment that they would have. I also used that essay to ask for staff and to build our personnel. When you have a system, when you have 27 different systems and you've got a bunch of different work groups, you've got a bunch of resources that are just kind of focused on their little niche. And as much as we're transforming that, we also need to work on those people. And so we've created a team around the ERP technologists within work groups, as well as technologists within IMS to support this over the long term. So now we have an informal relationship in that respect, but it's a very important exercise as a part of your relationship with the sponsors early to do that. And we spend a lot of time communicating what that expectation is. The first time someone gets it, they're like, I don't know. But identifying roles and responsibilities and really communicating those early helps. And it's consistent. Someone in purchasing is going to have the same responsibility as someone in the revenue group when it comes time to work through our configuration workbooks and things of that sort. So yeah, I would take the time to do that and really think about that and express that with your leadership. It's an exercise of patience, right? It's an exercise of patience. It takes time to do this, and you need a long-term commitment. And in cities where we work in a political world where we're always chasing the next shiny thing, it's easy to lose your attention to something. And that kind of an exercise helps with the patience on the project and that perseverance.
Patience is a good good word for Workday or for implementations. Monica, I know, Sourcewell is a little bit, quite a bit smaller than Salt Lake City. Do you have anything to add from a project staffing versus, daily activities perspective?
Yeah, definitely. That was tough, right? I mean, there's some value in having a small workforce, but when you implement a big project like this, it's hard because they already wear multiple hats, right? I mean, our payroll person also did, AP or AR, or, the backup to the backup was the other primary. And so we definitely tried to bring in backfills. I don't like that term, but, brought in some supporting people when we could to try to help, and said, we needed to always have multiple people in certain conversations, right? Because we didn't want a single point of failure in any of these areas. I couldn't have just one person in the room or making decisions or hearing, you know, the knowledge transfer and things like that. It was just really a lot of conversations with the team members, you know, from their managers really saying, how do we support you? How do we make our decisions as quickly as we can? You know, give you time off as we can. You might not get a lot during this year, honestly, but we'll try. Fed them a lot, tried to, you know, send them things, right? Bribe them with food, bribe them with nice things if you can, you know, cards and all that. But really, we're fortunate because people just really signed up, and we held each other accountable, and they really held themselves accountable. And even that doesn't always happen in government, right? But they really just put their heads down and said, you know what, we know what the goal is of the system, and we're gonna, you know, spend the time and the energy and get it done. And we flexed on some things if we had to, right? I mean, we went big bang and we did a lot, but there were some things where we said, you know what, we can really put that in later. Like, that is not the most important thing to get done versus getting our whole HR module in, right? And getting our people in. And so making some of those decisions on scope along the way of those things that were great, but they weren't the highest value add, hopefully gave people a little bit of, you know, kept their head above water.
Yeah.
But it's a hard balance. It's a hard balance.
Keeping an eye on the people definitely helps. And I think is really important, especially in public sector. I know we're almost at the top of the hour, but there was one question, Noel, that I think came in that would be great for Salt Lake to answer. And it's, were there any unique challenges, or are there any unique challenges with your transport, or, you know, your transport in airport?
Yeah, we're uncovering some. I mean, I think that on the HR side, it's seeming to be pretty standard, not a huge, you know, probably easier than public safety. But we're finding more with the way they gather revenue is unique. A lot of leases. We're working on, you know, replacing a cashiering system at the same time. So we're looking at how we do some of those billables. We've got a lot. So that's an area where we're finding more on that. And then I think as we redesign the chart of accounts, we're providing a lot of sort of uniqueness or space within that chart of account structure for the airport. And I think we're doing the same for utilities. Utilities is similar. We've got you know, Salt Lake City runs water, sewer, street lights, storm drains, and we own a lot of land in the watersheds. We do watershed protection. We move 35 million gallons of water a day. So I think that's probably going to be where we find a lot of those answers, is how we structure that foundational data model to have more space for that uniqueness. And then we start tripping over some of those sort of unique things that don't happen in the other places, like I say, like some of those revenue things, leases, grants, relationships, construction relationships with the FAA, things like that. Those are coming together. But my hope is, and it feels like, because I'm sitting in almost all of those chart of accounts meetings, that we should be able to address that through the giving more space within that foundational data model to address that. Currently, we address it with like these abstract codes. Sometimes they're object codes, sometimes they're cost centers. We've run out of numbers, so we just start making things up now, and we should have a whole much better structure. Our finance team at the airport is excited about it.
It's a lot different than a lot of the legacy processes airports are using. I can, you know, add to that from, you know, a lot of the airports face similar challenges with unique color attached to them. You know, Denver International, Dallas, Salt Lake City's kind of in the middle of the implementation. And there are a few airports that are going through the RFP. Well, Memphis International is live. And then we know of 2 that are kind of nearing the end of their RFP processes. And I can tell you the 2 common challenges with airports is, as Noel talked about, your funding sources. Figuring out what those funding sources are now is going to be very helpful as you're, well, I mean, creating an SOW or entering design sessions. Denver International, for example, has a lot of oil revenue. There's oil fields all over land that the Denver International owns, which is a little unique. The other challenge are going to be around rates and charges. Workday itself, or by itself, Workday doesn't accommodate everything that's needed around rates and charges at this point in time. It handles a lot of it, but there are areas that need to be, addressed and calculated and reported on in either kind of a third-party system or some reports and dashboards, some aggregate of that information. So again, starting to pick apart the pieces of what your rates and charges look like would help either an implementer, a solution architect, or Workday, figure out how to weave them all together to, give you a system that meets needs on both of those accounts. So I know we are at the top of the hour. Rich, I'm going to hand it, back over to you. If you have anything, any closing remarks to make, but thank you all so much for joining and interacting with us, and hopefully you'll join some more of our webinars in the future.
Yep. No, I will just say thank you, Maggie, for moderating and sharing your specific insights. And just thank you, Noel, Monica, Leslie, and Mike. Really appreciate your time. A lot of attendance, a lot of active questions. Thank you for responding to those. I will say that at the end of this, we will provide a copy of the recording to everyone who registered. So that's good. And then we will follow up with some copies of the materials that were requested, including if we can get Monica's laminated guiding principles, that would be great. I think people want to see that, and others. But with that, I would just say thank you. This has been overwhelming. And again, I know it takes a lot of time away from you folks, but clearly people wanted to hear what you had to say. And I think that's really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again.